HP Lion Pride PT1. Albus Dumbledore sat staring at the seemingly inconsequential ring upon his desk. The gold was old and dull, and the black stone was cracked, quite seriously now. That had been caused by the sword of Gryffindor, resting at his side now. The old man had broken the stone only an hour before, after retrieving it from a broken-down hut just south of Little Hang Elton that very afternoon. It had been rather difficult to get, which made him wonder what other wards and protections he might face when he found the others. While it was true that Lord Voldemort was a most powerful individual, Dumbledore felt he lacked imagination. Perhaps it was another weakness they might exploit in the future. He opened his desk drawer at the sound of frantic knocking on his office door. He dropped the ring inside where it fell upon a mangled-looking book that had several holes stabbed into the covers. "Enter," Dumbledore said as he shut the drawer. His familiar, a rare and beautiful-looking phoenix chirped musically from its perch in the corner. Dumbledore couldn't help but smile at the great bird's attempt to calm his master. "I was not expecting you this evening, Severus." "How may I help you?" Dumbledore said, rising from his seat and going to a cabinet behind him. He pulled 2 crystal goblets from within, and poured a measure of amber liquid from a large decanter in each before turning around to hand one to his potions master, who looked rather haggard at the moment. Dumbledore was fairly confident he knew what it was that was having such a pronounced effect on the younger man. "My apologies for disturbing you, but I had to come. This couldn't wait for, well, anything. It is as we thought. Narcissa came to me, asking for help," Severus Snape said, gratefully accepting the liquor, and swallowing it all in one swig. "Did you make our offer?" Dumbledore asked, feeling the hair on the back of his neck begin to stand up. It was clear that something had gone horribly wrong. Snape was not a man to be so easily agitated. The dark-haired man refused to meet Dumbledore's eyes, and pushed past the headmaster to pour another drink. There was a complication. Rodolphus was there. "He is most upset. He feels the Dark Lord should not have allowed Longbottom to get away with murdering his wife." "Albus." Snape turned to look at the older man. "He's sworn revenge." "We knew that would happen," the old headmaster replied calmly. "I have already made arrangements for those concerned. They will be quite safe for the holiday." "What of Narcissa?" "They had me in a corner, I had no choice," Snape said quickly, looking away from Dumbledore again. "Severus," Dumbledore said firmly. "Tell me what happened." Snape took a deep breath, and swallowed his second drink. "I took the unbreakable vow. If Draco cannot accomplish the task set before him, then I must be the one to." Dumbledore looked as if he'd been slapped by a giant. Snape did not finish his sentence. He simply watched horror-struck as the elder man emptied his own goblet of alcohol. Silence reigned for several long moments. Only the sounds from the silver instruments and the occasional coo from Fawkes broke the tense quiet. "This does complicate things," Dumbledore finally whispered. "I had no choice," Snape repeated. "If I had refused, then they would have suspected you more than they do now," Dumbledore said, waving his hand airily. "How long do we have?" "Until the end of the school year. The Dark Lord does not expect the boy to survive, Albus. I think he meant for me to be the one to he meant for me to do it all along," Snape said sadly. That is quite clear, I think. Well, at least we have some warning, and I shall be able to get my affairs in order. However, it will make matters even more difficult than I had anticipated. I will need your help, and it will mean that. No. Snape said vehemently. You swore that you'd never tell him. I did, and I have kept my word all these years. However, I believe that you have been mistaken in not telling him yourself. I have said from the very moment he walked through our doors that you have hidden behind your grudges and have failed to see the young man he has become. He is much like his father, it is true, however, he also possesses many of his mother's finer qualities, including his capacity for forgiveness. He would never forgive what I did. I can't even forgive myself. Snape said hatefully. Perhaps together you two might find a way. He will need you, especially after I am gone. Stop it. Snape snapped. You're not going anywhere. I decided on my way here that I would do my best to help Draco. If we can turn him back from this path. It will not be easy. Dumbledore pointed out. You yourself told me that he sought the Dark Lord out on his own. He is angry, and like Rodolphus, seeks revenge for the insults he believes he has suffered. But you'll be able to make him see reason. Snape replied. And then, I shall finally shake off this horrid existence once and for all, and Potter will never know of my sins. That is unacceptable, Severus, and I refuse to allow it. You remember what you swore to me? To her. Dumbledore looked angrily at Snape, who was now shaking with rage. You are far more valuable to the light than I am. Snape said bitterly. And I am old. I'm tired, and I'm not as fast as I once was. My time is ending, Severus. Whether through natural cause, or murder, it is coming. I've known it for a long time. I am ready for it. It is only you who I can trust to carry on. Should Lord Voldemort manage his coup, then we will need someone to protect the young. We need him to make you the headmaster of the school. Snape nodded, remembering their many conversations about what the Dark Lord had planned for the magical community when he eliminated his enemies once and for all. Voldemort planned to purify the magical community, by ridding it of all Muggleborns, and then to turn his forces on the Muggles. Dumbledore reminded Snape of another man who had wished to destroy people he hated, and what it had done to the world. This was exactly the same, with the exception that the Muggles would not be able to fight against this. I am going to hold you to your oath, even after my death, Severus. Dumbledore said firmly, and smiled softly to himself as Snape glared at him. You're going to make it easy for me to want to end your life, aren't you? Snape said, knowing the headmaster's plan before it had even been spoken. Indeed. Now, since you are here, I'd like it if you would help me with a few matters. Dumbledore rose from his seat. Snape simply watched him, hating and loving the man who had saved his life, just as he hated and loved another young man, who reminded him of two people who brought out the very best and very worst of him, so long ago. She stood in front of a full-length mirror, her dressing gown open, and hanging off her arms. Her dark brown hair was done in a loose pile on her head, and deep brown eyes were glistening with pain tears as she inspected her figure. Daphne Greengrass had developed a very attractive figure. Most other girls would have given anything to have her body. Her legs were long and slim and the color of fresh cream. She had a slender build, like a dancer's, with good curves. Daphne had liked her figure very much, and rarely found flaw with what she had been given. Until a few weeks ago. As she stared almost blankly, her fingers traced a long ropey-looking purple scar. It began just below her left shoulder and ran diagonally down her torso, cutting across her breast and stopping just above her navel. It stood out in stark contrast against her light-colored skin, and felt rough on her fingertips. Daphne had received the scar from Antonin Dolohov, she'd been told. One of the Death Eaters that she and several other Hogwarts students had fought against in the Department of Mysteries while attempting a rescue of her then-boyfriend's godfather. At the thought of that night, Daphne's chest constricted a bit. It had been 2 weeks since Ron Weasley's funeral, and the day that Harry Potter had broken her heart. The boy had told her that he was breaking up with her for her own safety, and he had left before she could say or do anything. After he had left, everything was a blur to her. She vaguely remembered falling down, and her friends trying to give comfort. She wasn't even sure how she'd arrived home. She had spent the last 2 weeks sequestered in her bedroom, doing hardly any more than sleeping. The family elf had made sure she took the potions she had been prescribed, and making sure she ate, but that was it. She hadn't even spoken to her mother and father, though her parents had tried. "Miss Daphne's bath be ready," a soft childlike voice said. Daphne turned and nodded at the diminutive house elf who disappeared with a quiet pop. Daphne slipped her robe off, and slid into the delicious warmth of her bath. Franny, the elf, always made it perfect, and the heat penetrated her body all the way to her bones. Daphne shut her eyes and tried to clear her mind, but it didn't work. She saw him so clearly. Harry had been an amazing boyfriend, and she loved him deeply. She could not stop thinking that she had done something wrong. Maybe he thought she was weak because she had gotten hurt, or maybe he had seen her in action and realized she was not very powerful. Daphne knew none of it was true, but her sadness at being left by the boy she had loved, was doing things to her self-esteem. The truth was, Harry Potter had broken up with her to protect her. At least that was what he had said. He hadn't even come to see her while she recovered in the hospital wing. With the help of her other friends, Daphne was sure that he had learned something very disturbing. She was also sure it had something to do with what had happened in the Department of Mysteries. Hermione said that between losing Ron, nearly losing the rest of them, and whatever Dumbledore had shared with him, Harry likely felt he had no other alternative. Memories of her year with Harry flooded her mind, and she recalled the first time they had ever kissed. They had been interrupted several times before. Each time they had gotten close to sharing their first kiss, someone would ruin it. Her younger sister screaming from behind some bushes where she had been spying, or Draco Malfoy hexing Harry. But that beautiful afternoon, after playing Muggle football, they had shared a special moment, and it had been better than she had ever imagined it would be. Harry had been so tender with her. The way he had held her, and how soft his lips were on her own. That one perfect moment had been followed by a very difficult year, in which a giant toad with some kind of personal vendetta had all but banned the use of magic. In a school that was supposed to teach magic. Harry had fought back though. He had led a secret group where he taught them how to fight, should they ever be attacked. She had stood by him through it all, even though their relationship suffered. Most every other couple snuck off after curfew to advance their physical relationship. Exploring the castle with one significant other to find secret places to explore one another was a rite of passage. One that Daphne had gladly passed upon in order to support Harry. When all was said and done, she felt their relationship was all the stronger for it. Besides, she was hopeful they could make up for what they missed this year. But Harry had ruined it when he told her they could no longer be together. He wanted to keep her safe. Daphne wiped the tears that had begun to fall. What on earth made Harry think she'd be safer without him? She'd been seen with him. She had fought at his side. She had announced her alignment to the world. What made him think no one would come after her to make her pay for her allegiance? She wondered about this so much that her brain hurt. She wished that she could talk to him and find out what he'd been told. She would have given anything to know what had happened. To understand why Harry had abandoned the people who cared about him the most. Despite the warmth of her bath, Daphne began to shiver again. Ever since Harry had disappeared with Dumbledore, she had been suffering bouts of chills that nothing could warm. She sighed heavily, and climbed out of the tub, dried herself, and wrapped herself in her fluffiest robe. She walked back to her bedroom, and found her younger sister, Astoria, waiting for her. "Tori, I'm really not in the mood," Daphne said wearily. "This is getting really awful to watch." Astoria looked up at her older sister. Astoria looked closer to their mother than Daphne did. At 13, Astoria's breasts were already as large as Daphne's, and it was clear that the younger girl would be much bustier. She had light brown hair and hazel eyes. She was more athletically built than Daphne, but her face was very soft and feminine, just like their mother's. "Have you tried writing him?" Astoria asked. "I have no idea where to send a letter." Daphne sighed, sitting in front of her vanity. She watched her younger sister in the mirror. Astoria got up from her seat on Daphne's bed. "Dad could find out, if you asked him. They're really worried about you." Daphne didn't say anything. She knew her mother and father were worried. They had told her so several times when they tried to get her to talk about it. Daphne had simply stared at a point between them to avoid their eyes. She hated how she was acting, but she had never felt so awful in her life. She had seen girls get dumped at school and seen them cry, but most of them were as right as rain a few days later, some of them already with new boyfriends. Tracy always called the rebounds, which Daphne had never really understood. "What exactly happened? None of this makes any sense to me, and I know that you don't want to talk about the ministry, but I'm totally confused. Every time I saw him with you he looked so happy." "You both did." Astoria tried to get her sister talking. "We were." Daphne sighed, her eyes falling to her lap. "I." She fell silent and Astoria came forward and put a hand on her sister's shoulder. "What did he say?" Daphne shut her eyes, trying to fight another wave of tears. She remembered how sad he looked that day. How determined to say what he had to say and leave. Yet, he looked so conflicted with himself. His eyes looked so sad as he'd broken up with her. "He told me that it was for my own safety." Daphne sighed after a long moment. "He thinks that you know who will leave me alone if I'm not dating him." "Well, that's stupid," Astoria replied sarcastically. "I don't think it really matters if you two are together or not. If he wants to hurt Harry, he'll come after all of you guys, even if Harry's not hanging around you anymore. Doesn't he realize that you guys might actually be better off fighting side by side? I thought he was smart, but now." Daphne couldn't help but smile at her sister's indigence. Daphne couldn't understand Harry's thought process either, but who could really understand boys at all? I think it's truly sad that he didn't even give you a chance to say how you felt. He just tells you how it's going to be, and then leaves without hearing your opinion. I never thought Harry would be that guy. Daphne suddenly looked up at her sister. Astoria was still ranting. I mean, really? Sure, I understand that he wants you to be safe, and that's sweet and noble and all, but wouldn't you be safer with him? I mean, I've seen him fight well, in the but I could see how amazing he was, and you and him together. I don't think you guys got beat by anyone. Okay, sure, you got hurt at the ministry. But a lot of people got hurt. Maybe if he learned some healing stuff, he would have known you were okay, and then maybe things would have been different. And besides, he is totally in love with you. Anyone who's got a decent pair of eyes can see it. Who does he think he's kidding? Daphne could only stare, her younger sister's speech making perfect sense to her. Harry had decided the fate of their relationship without even respecting her enough to hear her opinion on the matter. And she didn't want to let him go. She loved him, and she'd risked her life for him. How dare he think he could just toss her aside? You're right. Daphne said softly. Who the hell does he think he is? Damn right. Astoria said, smacking her fist into her hand. I almost died fighting with him. He can't toss me aside like a broken wand. I'm going to show that arrogant little git that he's stuck with me. He's not getting rid of me so easily. Voldemort be damned, Daphne said. She was suddenly filled with serious rage at what had happened to her. Whoa. Astoria stepped back, trying to suppress a shudder. What? Daphne looked up at her sister, who had gone suddenly pale. You must really be mad. You said you know whose name. I did. Harry has no idea what he's done. Personally, if it were me, I'd punch him right in the eye, make him apologize to me, and then once I'm finished showing him the error of crossing a green grass woman, I'd make him snog me until he couldn't see straight. Daphne smiled for the first time in 2 weeks. Thanks for that, she said a bit wryly, scrunching her nose. Though I could have done without the last bit. I don't fancy imagining you snogging my soon-to-be boyfriend. Sorry. I got a bit carried away. Daphne went to her wardrobe and began pulling out some clothes. She began dressing quickly and purposefully. Where are you going? Astoria asked curiously. To talk to Dad. If you think I'm waiting all summer until school starts, you're mad. Jonathan Greengrass sat in his study looking over some new legislation that was being passed around the Wizengamot. There was a lot happening these days. The biggest thing happening was the outcry for the resignation of Cornelius Fudge. Fudge was trying desperately to hang on to his office, but it was clear to everyone who worked within the ministry that there would be a new minister of magic. A few names were being mentioned. First there was Pius Thicknesset. Pius as a politician. He was as smooth and charismatic as Lucius Malfoy, though not nearly as wealthy. Jonathan was not a fan of Thicknesset, but not because of how much he reminded people of Malfoy Sr., but because of the whispers that surrounded the man. Though there was nothing concrete, it was widely rumored that Pius was a fan of the dark arts, and it was through his subtle use of those arts that helped get so high in government. Jonathan felt there might be a bit of truth to those whispers, as Pius was quite an idiot. Another name was Rufus Scrimgeour. Jonathan didn't really know much about the man, other than he was a very decorated orator. He looked a lot like a lion, with a mane of dark blonde hair, and a grizzled face. Jonathan knew nothing of the man's politics, but assumed he would be very proactive against the Dark Lord. The last name, the one who seemed to be getting the most mentions, was Amelia Bones, the head of the Auror department. Amelia was a very capable witch, and Jonathan was certain that she would lead the magical community well against the threat of the Death Eaters and their leader. Madame Bones was well liked within the ministry, and other than her decidedly pro-Muggle-born stance, she had the majority of support to become the new Minister of Magic. Unfortunately, her opinion of Muggles seemed to be the only thing that would make things difficult for her. Too many seats on the Wizengamot were held by ancient pure-blood houses, many of whom believed that Muggleborns had somehow stolen magic from wizards. Jonathan had once questioned one of those who felt this was the only possible explanation for Muggleborns, only to get a very long-winded speech of nonsense. Jonathan himself was pure blood, but he felt that if it were not for Muggleborns, wizards would have died out a millennia ago. His father had explained it to him while he was still in Hogwarts. As he grew up, and did a bit of study in wizard lineage, he found that his father was right. More than a handful of families died out, or at least bred the magic right out of the line. There were other things happening, keeping Jonathan and his fellows quite busy. The trial of former Undersecretary Dolores Umbridge was going to take place in the next month. The case against the former ministry worker was pretty solid. She had used the Cruciatus curse on Minerva McGonagall, and it was rumored that she had used it on Harry Potter as well. Harry Potter. The boy who lived. The boy that had broken the heart of his daughter. Jonathan did not know the details. He only knew that Harry had told his daughter that they couldn't see each other anymore. He had done so at the funeral for the Weasley boy. Daphne had come home devastated. He had been proud when he had learned that she had stood by the boy and fought Death Eaters within the ministry. He and his wife had of course been horrified to learn that she had nearly lost her life, but proud that she had chosen the side of right, and fought what she believed, or at least, who she loved. Jonathan had been impressed by the boy when they had met. He was quite smart, if not a bit uninformed. He had stood against the government, and inevitably won when the truth came to light. He had suffered at the hands of those who are meant to protect the youth, and he had led his fellows against the dark. And yet, right now, all Jonathan wanted to do was find the boy and strangle him for the pain he had caused his daughter. The trouble was, he couldn't help but feel there was more to the story. Unfortunately, Daphne wasn't talking. Dad. Jonathan looked up to see Daphne standing in the doorway. Daphne? Come in. Are you all right? He asked, and Daphne nodded, then screwed up her face and shook her head. I need your help. I need to talk to Harry. Better yet, I need to see him. I need to fix this. He's wrong, and I need to show him that he's wrong. I don't understand. Jonathan said, leaning back in his chair. Harry thinks he's protecting me. That's why he broke things off with me. But it wasn't just me. He thinks by staying away from us, he can, I don't know. He thinks the Dark Lord will not attack you or the others if he is no longer friendly with any of you. Daphne nodded. But he's wrong. He needs us. Voldemort will kill us all no matter what Harry thinks. He knows we all care for Harry. Jonathan suppressed a shudder at Daphne's use of the Dark Lord's name, but stared incredulously at her. He's truly had an influence on you. You would never have spoken the name before. Dad, I love him, Daphne admitted softly. It isn't some school thing that will go away after graduate. I would have gladly given my life for him that night. I feel so empty without him. Like I'm broken. It like Mom always told us. I'm stronger with him. I'm whole. Jonathan stared at his eldest daughter for a moment. He knew exactly what she was talking about, because he felt the same about his wife, Daphne's mother. Aurora was an extraordinary woman. Jonathan could not imagine a life without her, and would do anything she asked of him, no matter how strange, or silly. He lived his life for his family. You think he will listen to you? Jonathan asked. He had his say. Daphne said bitterly. Now it's my turn to express my opinion. He's not getting rid of me for some stupid, half-thought-out reasoning. Jonathan gave a rare smile, and even chuckled. Just like your mother. She was the very same when we began dating. I had it in my head that I should marry a pure blood. I tried to break things off with her right before we graduated. Daphne's mouth hung open. She had never known that her father had tried to end things with her mother. Between her and your grandfather, I was set straight, and a month later, I proposed. She said no. What? Daphne exclaimed. Yes. She said no, but refused to end our relationship. She wanted me to earn it, I suppose. I asked again a few months later. She said yes that time. But if she had not, there is no doubt in my mind we would have remained together, just as deeply in love as we are now. I think our love has deepened. Both Daphne and her father turned to find Daphne's mother standing in the doorway, holding a steaming mug of tea, which she set before her father. She settled into her husband's lap and kissed his lips softly. A year ago, Daphne might have been sickened a tad bit watching such a display from her mother and father, but right now, it seemed like the most beautiful scene she had ever witnessed. Daphne, that is we, are very proud of the young woman you're becoming. Aurora said as she faced her eldest daughter. You are intelligent, thoughtful, kind, very beautiful, and surprisingly powerful. You have proven that you are fully capable of making good decisions, and facing the consequences of your actions. You are more mature than either your father or I was at your age. If you are sure of your feelings for Harry, then I believe you should be allowed to confront him, and figure this out with him. At that Aurora turned back to face her husband, who nodded his agreement. Your mother is right. You are only a little over a year away from becoming of age. Yet, you have shown that you can act well beyond your years. Perhaps it would be all right for you to try and solve this dilemma. Tomorrow, I will track down Harry's address, and you can take the night bus for the day. Just promise not to hex the boy. It wouldn't do for you to receive a ministry citation. You are still underage. I promise I won't hex him. Daphne smiled as she rose from her seat. Thank you both. After she left, Aurora turned a worried expression to her husband, who mirrored her concern. Why am I suddenly afraid for the boy? She asked, and Jonathan began to chuckle softly. Harry Potter lay in his bed staring at the ceiling of his rather small bedroom. He'd been doing this ever since he'd returned to number 4, Privet Drive, the day of his best friend's funeral. The day he'd left the girl he loved, and his friends. Now, he was more miserable than he'd ever been in his entire existence, which was saying something. Harry lived with his aunt, uncle, and cousin, who had treated Harry as if he were some kind of disease. They had lied to the entire neighborhood, and perpetrated the rumors that he was some sort of delinquent. All because they hated anything they perceived to be abnormal. Growing up, Harry's relatives had done all they could to squash the freakishness out of him. They had made him their personal slave, never bought him anything new, or even celebrated his birthday. He'd grown up quite lonely, as his cousin, Dudley, had done everything in his power to ensure Harry was alone. Harry's life had changed forever the day he'd learned he was a wizard, and many hidden truths had come out on that fateful night. Over the next 5 years, Harry learned much about himself and his mysterious past. He'd even made friends. Hagrid had been the first. A monstrous mountain of a man, with the temperament of a cuddly teddy bear. Then Ron, on the train to school. Hermione followed, and for the next few years, they were inseparable. Until the tournament. The Triwizard Tournament had not only tested Harry's limits, but his friendships as well. Hermione had stuck by him from the beginning, but Ron, who suffered serious self-esteem issues, had not believed Harry. What was worse was that Ron had known all along that Harry had not entered himself, but his stubbornness, and his pride, wouldn't allow him to make things right between them. Eventually, Ron had apologized, and the three were once again united. Then, at the end of that year, a new friend revealed themselves, though it wasn't until the start of Harry's 5th and latest year that he would truly get to know Daphne. Daphne had proven to be so much more than another ally, or trusted confidant. She had awakened something within Harry's heart. She had become the single most important person in Harry's life, and he had been completely unaware of how much he truly cared for the girl until the day he watched her get cursed by a Death Eater. The moment she fell to the floor, presumably dead, Harry's world ceased. Daphne had survived, and so far as he knew, was mending well. It was because of that event, and what he learned after that night, that Harry felt it was better for everyone if they were to stay away from him. Harry had finally learned why it was he'd been hunted by the most powerful and notorious dark wizard in a century. Lord Voldemort wanted Harry dead because of a prophecy that predicted Voldemort's downfall. The funny thing was, that the prophecy was not specific. It could have been another Dark Lord, some other child. But it had been Voldemort to actually put the prophecy into effect. The Dark Lord had marked Harry as an equal the night he tried to murder Harry as an infant. That night, nearly 15 years ago, had irrevocably changed the fate of 2 wizards. Dumbledore had sworn that he was going to waste no more time, and train Harry to face his destiny. Harry had then vowed to protect the people he cared for. He would not see anyone else sacrifice themselves to save him. So, he had done the right thing, and told Daphne they could no longer see each other. Harry had never hated himself more than he did now. He knew that she was safe now that he was no longer in her life, but he could not stop thinking of her. He still had 2 more years at Hogwarts, and he would see her every day, and every day it would be a knife twisting in his heart. It wasn't just Daphne, though. He had vowed to keep away from Hermione and Neville and Tracy as well. He couldn't stand the thought of any one of them being used to get to him. He had proven that he would try to save those he cared for, and Harry knew the Dark Lord would exploit this weakness. Both Neville and Hermione had been writing to him. He gotten 2 letters from Neville, and at least one for every day he'd been back at the Dursleys from Hermione. Hermione was not going to give up, Harry knew, which was going to make things very difficult when school began. Harry hoped he might be kept very busy with his promised training. There was a soft knock on his door, and Harry's aunt poked her rather horse-like face into his bedroom. "Harry, lunch is nearly ready." "Thank you," Harry said politely, not moving from his bed. He heard the door close and sighed heavily. This had been the nicest his relatives had ever treated him, and Harry had Dumbledore to thank for it. The day that the headmaster brought Harry back to the Dursleys, he had insisted on speaking with Harry's Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia. Dumbledore glared at Harry's relatives, and spoke in a very disapproving tone the entire time. "Petunia, your sister would be most disappointed in how you have treated her son. You alone are responsible for all that has befallen Harry under your care. It is quite a miracle that Harry turned out better than your own son, for all the abuse he has had heaped upon him. To you, Vernon, who judge a person's worth by what they possess, this should be a lesson for you. Your nephew, whom you have spent a lifetime abusing, insulting, and using as a slave, is one of the richest people in England. As the last of the Potter line, he stands to gain a healthy sum of gold, as well as a handful of properties, and 2 or 3 very profitable businesses. Had you shown him kindness and love while he lived here, it is very likely he would have been most generous in return, once he learned of his vast fortune." Both Harry and Vernon had stared bug-eyed at Dumbledore. The old man simply shook his head in annoyance at the look of greed on Vernon and Petunia's faces. Even Dudley looked anxious to get his hands on a large pile of gold. "You can wipe those silly looks off your faces. I would not be surprised if Harry chose to use that wealth to see you all live the rest of your lives in total misery," the old man said bitterly. "Harry will be staying with you for 2 weeks. At that time, I will be coming to collect him, and then you will never see him again, unless he chooses to seek you out. Good evening." Dumbledore had held their gazes for a long moment, before taking Harry by the arm and walking to the door. "Sir, is all that true? Am I really that rich?" Harry had asked, more than a bit stunned. "It is indeed. The vault in which you've taken money out to purchase school items is little more than a trust vault. Many old families set them up with each child's birth, to make sure they can cover the costs of schooling. The Potter family was quite old, and had amassed quite a fortune. On your 17th birthday, you shall inherit it all, and the goblins will be most anxious to speak to you on matters of investment, I am sure. For now, however, you should not think on it. As I said, I will be coming to retrieve you in 2 weeks' time." "Where will we be going?" Harry asked. "I shall not say any more. Suffice to say, I believe that while we will be working very hard, you shall quite enjoy the holiday. Now, before I depart, there is one more matter in which I wish to speak on." "Your friends?" "No," Harry said, lowering his eyes. "It's better this way. I ask that you spend the next 2 weeks to reconsider, Harry. You do not have to do this alone. In fact, you might find that your friends will be able to help you in ways that you can not even begin to imagine. I won't watch another one of them die to protect me." Harry shook his head. "They're all better off staying away from me. It's safer for them that way." Dumbledore lowered his own head, and gave a soft sigh. "I hope you think about what I have said, Harry. I shall see you in 2 weeks' time. With that, the old headmaster left number 4 Privet Drive. Since that night, Harry's relatives had become some of the most cheerful, friendly people Harry had ever known. They couldn't seem to do enough for Harry. At meals, which Harry no longer was forced to cook, Aunt Petunia gave him the biggest helpings. Neither Uncle Vernon nor Dudley complained about this. Dudley was forced to do the chores usually set for Harry, and Vernon had not uttered the word freak at all. Unfortunately, Harry was onto their plan. They clearly thought that Harry would reward them for their treatment of him this summer. Harry always chuckled when he thought about it. There was no way 2 weeks of fawning would ever make up for 14 years of abuse and neglect. Harry brushed it all out of his mind. He had too much to concern himself with. He was trying to figure a way to avoid his friends at school this coming year, as well as wondering what he might be learning from Dumbledore that summer. However, as happened so often, his thoughts wandered to Daphne, and how she was doing. Dumbledore's words haunted him as well. You might find that your friends will be able to help you in ways that you cannot even begin to imagine. What did that even mean? Harry wondered. Are they going to jump in front of a killing curse? He cringed at the thought of Hermione lying upon the ground, her soft cinnamon-colored eyes staring lifeless up at him. Or Tracy's ever-present slight smirk frozen on her face forever. Or Neville, looking horrified as death took him. And Daphne. Stop it! Harry cursed himself. In the past few days, Harry's inner voice had begun sounding like Ron. The problem was, the Ron/inner voice was making sense. Harry thought somehow his psyche was taking on the properties of his friends in order to win this ongoing inner struggle. It's better for them, Harry argued. Is it? Ron would ask. Harry just imagined Ron standing before him, hands on his hips the way Hermione would stand when she was angry. Yes. Voldemort won't go after them if they don't associate with me. They're safer this way, ... You're so daft, Potter. It doesn't matter if they're with you or not. He's seen your mind. He knows your heart. At least with you, they have a chance. And don't you deserve some happiness? Isn't better to have loved and lost? They deserve better. Harry argued with his subconscious, which now sounded exactly like his red-headed friend, which made Harry shudder to realize. So do you, mate. Harry heard the doorbell ring, and he leapt off his bed, thankful to end this madness. Today was the day that Dumbledore had said he would be coming to collect him. Harry had spent the last few days going through his meager belongings and preparing to leave the Dursleys for the last time. He shut the lid on his trunk and looked to see that Hedwig, his snowy owl, was still in her cage where she had been since arriving with another letter from Hermione that morning. He shut the cage, and trying not to disturb his owl, set her cage on top of his trunk, then went down to meet the headmaster, anxious to begin the next chapter of his life. It was not at all what she had expected. In fact, she found it rather disturbing. Every single house looked exactly alike, save for the numbers set beside each door. How could anyone live in such a place, she wondered as she walked down the quaint little street. Daphne had gotten her information just after breakfast. Her father had made a special flu call and given her what she needed. Her mother gave her a small coin purse which was filled with money, and waited with her as Daphne summoned the night bus. Daphne had decided quickly that she did not like the night bus. It was like riding the carts at Gringotts, which she had never truly liked. Once the bus finally stopped in Surrey, Daphne had gratefully stepped off, not relishing the thought of riding it home. However, since his house was not connected to the flow network, she had very little choice. All of her concerns were washed away when she spotted number 4. Her feelings became mixed. She desperately wanted to see Harry and kiss him and hold onto him and tell him that there was nothing they couldn't overcome together. But he had tried to dump her. He had tried to break up with her for the stupidest reason she had ever heard in her life. He wanted to protect her. He wanted her to be safe from the war that he seemed to be at the center of. Like it was even remotely possible for her to be safe. The only way that could happen was if she were to leave England entirely, and that was not likely to happen. Not while he was here. They were destined to be together, and Daphne meant to make him see it, even if it killed him. The lawn was immaculate, and the stone walk looked as if it were scrubbed. Daphne almost felt as if she should have wiped her feet before stepping onto it. She felt like someone was watching her as she got to the door, though it was clear there was no one around. She rang the doorbell, and waited. She had spent a lot of time preparing herself for this meeting. She wanted Harry Potter to realize exactly how big a mistake he had made in trying to leave her. She had chosen her best pair of jeans, which she felt hugged her nicely, accentuating her curves. She matched that with a button-down shirt and vest, which made her chest look bigger, undoubtedly due to the bar she had worn. She had even left a few buttons undone to show off her cleavage. She was playing dirty, she knew, but all was fair in love and war. Her hair was loose around her face, just the way he liked. Harry had a strange fascination with her hair, not that she minded. It was incredibly nice the way he ran his fingers through her hair when they relaxed together. One time, she had sworn she'd started purring in her chest like some contented cat. Luckily, Harry had not heard a thing. She stood waiting for only a moment before the door opened and she set eyes on possibly the largest human being she had ever seen in her life. He was tall, taller than she was. But he was also immensely wide. Daphne could see that it wasn't all fat, however. His arms looked like they had more than a bit of muscle on them. He had sandy blonde hair and beady little eyes which roved over her body hungrily. It made her shiver slightly. "Can I help you?" the boy leered, and Daphne took an involuntary step back. "I'm here to see Harry Potter," Daphne said, sounding braver than she felt under this boy's lustful stare. At the mention of Harry's name, the boy's face changed to one of apprehension. "What do you want him for?" the boy asked, obviously curious why a girl would choose Harry over him. Daphne felt the sudden need to explain the finer points of women to this lunkhead, but she had more important things to deal with. "I need to speak with him." "Is he here?" Daphne said firmly, but politely. "Yeah," the boy said, his eyes darting about. Daphne wondered what he was looking for, as he seemed to be taking in the street beyond her, which was empty. "Are you one of them?" he asked, his tone becoming a bit fearful. "One of who?" Daphne asked curiously. The boy bent forward, and whispered. "His kind." Daphne was now horribly confused, and she was beginning to get angry. Well, angrier than she already was. "Could you just please get Harry?" she snapped. She had no time for this. "Who is it, Dudley, dear?" It was a woman, likely the boy's mother. Daphne was once again surprised when the woman appeared in the doorway. She was terribly thin with an impossibly long neck, and a face that only a horse could love. How had this woman made such a child? There was no resemblance at all. Perhaps the kid wasn't hers. "I'm here to see Harry. Is he here or not?" Daphne asked, getting more perturbed. The woman stared at her for several long moments, as if trying to decide what she should do, when a third voice was heard. This one she knew, and it sent a wave of warmth through her body. "Who is it?" The woman and the boy stepped away and Harry came into view. He looked just as wonderful as always, his hair just as messy, and his amazing green eyes sparkling in the sunlight. His face changed from curious to disbelieving as he saw her. Daphne merely smiled warmly at him as he stepped forward. "What are you doing here?" Harry asked. Daphne didn't answer right away. She simply continued to look at him. Then, her smile melted away and her face contorted into a mask of rage. She balled her fist and with all the power she could muster, hit Harry Bloody Potter right in the face. Harry stumbled back, and tripped over the large boy, who was trying to get out of the way. The woman stared in horror at the Daphne's handiwork. "How dare you decide what's best for me without even speaking to me?" Daphne shouted. "I thought Draco Malfoy was an arrogant sod, but you just surpassed him. I mean, the absolute gall of you to dump me, at a funeral, no less, and not even give me a chance to express my feelings on the matter. I mean, my gods, I almost died for you. That's why I..." Harry tried, holding his eye where Daphne had clocked him. "Shut up. You had your say, mister, now it's my turn. If you think for a second you can just walk away from me like that, you have really gone round the twist. I am not some simpering fangirl who you can use and toss away like some cheap floozy. I am in love with you, and I will fight to my dying breath for you. Even if it means fighting you." "Yes, I think you made that clear," Harry said, still holding his now pulsing eye. "You deserved it for what you did to me. Harry, you didn't even come see me in the hospital wing. I knew you were upset over what happened, but how could you think that it would all be better if you simply stayed away? It made things worse." "Excuse me." Daphne turned to see the thin woman looking out the door with a look of utter humiliation on her face. "Perhaps you can bring a conversation, indoors. There's no need to alert the entire neighborhood to your plight." "Plight?" Daphne asked, incredulous. She arched her eyebrow in a curious expression, which the woman didn't bother to notice. "No one else needs to know of your condition," the woman said with pleading eyes. Daphne turned a confused look to Harry, who mirrored her own confusion. The woman waved frantically with her bony hands for Daphne to enter the house, keeping her large eyes on the street behind her. Daphne gave a quick glance over her shoulder as she entered. Harry rose from his spot on the floor, and she followed him into the sitting room, while the thin woman escorted her son into the kitchen, and back to his meal. "What does she mean, my condition?" Daphne asked with cold eyes. "What have you told her?" "I haven't spoken to them at all since I've been home." "We don't get along," Harry said, his tone bitter. "How did you find out where I lived? And how did you get here?" "My father got your address, and I took the night bus here," Daphne replied. Why did she look so nervous? Daphne asked, pointing to the kitchen. My aunt and uncle are very concerned about what the neighbors think of them. They have done all they could to make everyone believe I'm some kind of delinquent. Oh my gods, she thinks you got me pregnant. Daphne nearly shouted. Her eyes were bulging and her hands shot to her mouth. Harry's eyes opened wide in horrified shock. But we never. He began. She doesn't know that. Daphne pointed out, and then began laughing. Harry could not help himself and began laughing as well. It wasn't very long before the both of them were holding their sides at the absurdity of their situation. Given how Daphne had been screaming at him, not to mention punching him in the face, it seemed a rather likely conclusion to someone who didn't know the full story. They began getting themselves under control, and Daphne began shaking her now pulsing right hand. That really hurt. I've never punched anyone before, Daphne said, still smiling. Harry looked up at her, his smile fading away to be replaced by the same hard look he'd worn at the funeral. You shouldn't be here, he said. I was being serious earlier, Harry, Daphne said, the smile still on her face. I'm not letting you go. Harry's smile faded and he fell onto the sofa. Daphne took a seat in an armchair and watched him. She could tell by his expression that he was struggling to keep his guard up, and she knew that she had to be careful here. One wrong word, and she would truly lose him. You don't understand, he began. Then help me too, Daphne pleaded. This doesn't make sense to me, Harry, and I'm not going to give up what is possibly the best thing in my life without a fight. I thought that this meant something to you as well as me, but your actions tell me different. It does mean something to me, damn it, Harry snapped. Daphne actually leaned away at Harry's retort, and Harry looked remorseful immediately. I'm sorry. You have no idea how much it hurt me to do that. To leave like that, but I have to. If you stay with me, you're going to get killed, and I can't take that. Isn't it my choice how I live my life? Daphne asked. Harry looked up at her, and she softened her gaze. Harry, life without you simply doesn't feel worth living. I'm no safer with you than without you. Voldemort knows I fought at your side, and despite your moronic noble intentions, he'll come after me eventually. It's the same for Hermione, Neville, and Tracy. We stand a far greater chance if we stand united than we do apart. And if it's my destiny to die fighting with you, then so be it. At least I'll know that I truly lived my life, and that I loved you as hard and as fiercely as any one person could love another. Harry shook his head. He could hear his inner voice laughing at him, and it irked him. She made perfect sense. And to make matters worse, he missed her desperately. He looked up at her and his heart leapt into his throat. She looked amazing, even though it was clear she was still angry at him. He knew he deserved her anger, and more. I can't. He began feebly. Damn it, Harry. I will cast a permanent sticking charm to you so you have no choice. I'm not letting this go. I love you. I love you, too. Harry admitted, his eyes filling with tears. I'm so sorry for what I did. Daphne came to his side, and wrapped her arms around him. I told you at the funeral that I understood. I know that you're hurting, Harry, and that you just want us all safe. We want the very same for you. Stop fighting all of us. Stop fighting me, and just let me help you. Let us help you. Harry allowed himself to be engulfed in Daphne's embrace. As soon as her arms were around him, the dam that he'd unknowingly been building, broke away. All of the pain of losing Ron, of avoiding his friends came crashing down on him. He felt so much anger at the people who were truly responsible for Ron's death. Two men in particular. Voldemort, and Dumbledore. Dumbledore, at least, was trying to make amends. "I'm sorry, Daphne," Harry whispered as he got himself under control. "It was just too much, and I couldn't deal with it." Daphne pulled his chin up so she could look into his eyes. "You should have confided in me. There is nothing that we can't get through." "But I can't do anything if you keep everything bottled up. You have to learn to trust in me, like I trust in you. Got it?" Harry had to smile at Daphne's tone. It was like she were talking to a 5-year-old, which admittedly, he had been acting like. "Now, are you going to kiss me or what?" She smiled, and Harry's heart pounded in his chest. Of course, he'd been an idiot to even think of leaving this girl, who'd proven to be not only beautiful but intelligent and powerful. Harry realized that he'd always done better with the help of his friends. Without Hermione and Ron's help, Harry would never have done the things he'd done. And if Neville, Tracy, and Daphne hadn't come along with the rest of them, Harry most assuredly not be sitting here with the girl he loved so deeply now. He bent forward and captured her lips. She tasted just as sweet as she always did, and Harry cursed himself for nearly giving her up. He had been stupid, and he knew it, but he didn't want to watch her die. But she was right. It was her choice. He would just have to find another way to protect her. All of them. He realized now that Daphne wasn't the only one who he would lose the same argument to, especially if Hermione's letters were anything to go on. As Daphne didn't need to leave for home right away, the two teens spent the afternoon together. Harry took his girlfriend out to the park where he had spent much of his youth in order to get away from the Dursleys. It was strange to Harry. He had never imagined he would ever be walking down Privet Drive with such a lovely girl. She held his hand the entire time, and looked about curiously as they walked. Many of the neighbors who Harry and Daphne gave strange looks at Harry. He guessed they were possibly wondering how such an obvious troubled youth wound up with a very upstanding-looking young woman. "Why does everyone stare at you here?" Daphne asked. "I mean, I know they don't know you're famous, or anything like that, but it's like they're all waiting for you to do something. You remember what I told you at my house? They all think I'm some kind of criminal. They've told everyone I go to some school for the criminally insane, or something. Plus, I'm always wearing this crap, because I've never had clothes of my own. So it all kind of perpetuates the story." Daphne turned astonished eyes on Harry, who'd suddenly gone red in the face. "You've never had your own clothes?" It was clear to her now that Harry was embarrassed by his admission, but he nodded confirmation. "That's horrid. No one should be made to live like that, Harry." "It wasn't the worst of it, but I don't want to talk about it anymore," Harry said, and Daphne respected his wish. Internally, however, she was wondering what else her boyfriend had suffered through during his youth. At 6:30, Harry and Daphne returned to Harry's house, and as soon as they entered the door, Aunt Petunia was on them. "Oh, wonderful, you're still here. Would you care to join us for dinner?" Daphne looked to Harry, who gave her a meaningful look. He had explained earlier how his relatives had flipped the personalities over the past 2 weeks in a desperate hope they might benefit from the knowledge that Harry was more than a bit wealthy. "Actually, I'd be delighted," Daphne said politely. She wanted to see more of this farce for some inexplicable reason. Maybe it was the Slytherin in her, but she just had to observe these people who had treated Harry so terribly over the years. "Wonderful." Petunia clapped her hands and led them to the dining room, where both Uncle Vernon and Dudley sat. "Ah, Harry, boy, who are you, lad? And who is this enchanting young lady?" Vernon said in his most polite and charming voice. This is Daphne Greengrass, my girlfriend. She goes to my school." Daphne almost missed it. The flash of fright in the extremely beefy man's beady little eyes. His hand came up as Harry introduced her, and hesitated just a fraction of a second before Vernon extended it fully. He shook her hand quickly and then it disappeared under the table, where Daphne was sure he was wiping it off on his trousers. Harry helped Daphne into a seat before taking one of his own. Uncle Vernon looked as if he was about to ask another question when the doorbell rang. "Dudley, go see who's at the door, Popkin," Aunt Petunia said with a smile. Dudley huffed as he got up from his chair and left them. "How long have you two been dating?" Aunt Petunia gave a false sweet smile as she set a bowl on the table before her husband. "Harry is so terrible about telling us what goes on in his life." "Nearly a year now." Daphne smiled politely. She was beginning to enjoy watching Harry's relatives. She wondered how nervous they might be with two magical people at their table. It was clear they were putting on a show for her benefit, possibly trying to convince her that they were the bar by which all others should be measured. It was too bad that Harry had forewarned her. Dudley said as he re-entered the dining room. His chubby face had gone quite pale. "It's for Harry." Both Harry and Daphne stood up and made their way out to the entry hall. Daphne felt in her back pocket for her wand, just to make sure it was there. Relief washed over her as she saw who the guest was. "It is good to see you again, Harry." Albus Dumbledore smiled genuinely as he greeted Harry with a kind handshake. Neither Harry nor Daphne could truly believe what they were seeing. Dumbledore was wearing a stylish Muggle silk suit in a fine magenta. He even had a matching fedora. "And Miss Greengrass, this is indeed a surprise. It was my intention to collect you this evening, just as soon as I had retrieved Mr. Potter." "What?" Harry asked. Daphne looked as confused as Harry sounded. "Yes. You see, I have been making plans for your summer, which I hope you will find, not only informative, but enjoyable as well. I've much to make up for. There have also been some other, let's call them, issues. We shall speak of those a bit later, however." Dumbledore smiled. "Well, we do still need to visit the Greengrass family, so if you'd be so kind to gather your things." Harry turned and began making his way up the stairs, with Daphne on his heels. "But, they've not eaten," Petunia said from the doorway. "Mrs. Dursley, do you honestly believe that one dinner will make up for 15 years of abuse? As I told you both when I returned with Harry at the beginning of the holiday, you should have shown him every kindness from the day you took him in. Now it is all too late. Your things, Harry," Dumbledore encouraged. Harry burst into his room and with Daphne's help, picked up his trunk and returned down the stairs. "Where do you think he's taking us?" Daphne asked. "With Dumbledore, anything is possible," Harry said, unable to contain his excitement of finally leaving the Dursleys forever. "Set them on the floor. If you would free your owl, Harry, and hand her to me." Dumbledore smiled, offering his arm. Harry unlatched Hedwig's cage, and helped the snowy owl out and onto Dumbledore's arm. Dumbledore brought the owl close and whispered something to her. Hedwig gave a soft hoot, leapt onto Harry's shoulder, where she rubbed her head against his, and then took flight, sailing out of the open back door. Dumbledore then gave a flick of his wand, and shrunk Harry's belongings. "They shall be quite safe in your pocket now, I believe," Dumbledore said, and Harry bent and picked up his trunk and Hedwig's cage, which looked like they'd be quite nice in a dollhouse. "Well now, I think it best if we got underway." He gave quick nod of his head to the Dursleys, who were now all standing in the small hallway watching Harry preparing to leave. Harry turned to his relatives. He had often thought of what he might say to them on the day he would finally be free of them, but now that the moment was here, words escaped him. "Well," Uncle Vernon said gruffly, and Harry was suddenly glad that the man he'd known all his life was back. "Do try not to darken our doorway again." "I think you can count on that," Harry said. "You people are disgusting," Daphne suddenly said, unable to hold her tongue. "I don't know if there is a hell, but if there is, you people have places reserved in the most awful part." "Come on," Harry said, taking Daphne by the arm. "Goodbye," he said over his shoulder. "I should have hexed them." Daphne sulked as Harry led her to the sidewalk, where Dumbledore was waiting patiently. "They aren't worth the effort," Harry said. "Indeed," Dumbledore agreed, not looking at them. He seemed to be scanning the street. At once he began walking, with Harry and Daphne right on his heel. "Sir, where are we going?" Harry asked. "All in good time, Harry. It is best not to speak of such things while in the open. Do not worry though. All will be revealed to you both soon." "Ah, this way." Harry recognized the same path he had faced Dementors the year before. Dumbledore stopped just as soon as they were out of sight and held up both of his arms. "If you two will kindly take hold, we shall be on our way," he said, still keeping his eyes scanning their surroundings. Harry looked at Daphne, who shrugged, and together they moved forward, each taking one of the headmaster's arms. "This might be a bit uncomfortable," Dumbledore chuckled. "Please like and subscribe."